Right now in the economy, we're in a pretty tough spot, just to be blunt and honest. And I think the next couple of years could bring some serious pain if this isn't handled correctly. And when I say serious pain, I mean stagflation. That one thing that everybody fears. It's basically an economy's worst nightmare. And right now, because of the economic environment that we're in, consequences because of policies, and because of bad data, we're more likely to face stagflation at this point than pretty much any point in the last few years. And if you remember correctly, a couple of years ago, there were calls for stagflation because of similar things caused by different reasons. And that's kind of what I want to talk about here today, why the economy is setting itself up for stagflation and how we fix this if it's even possible. So let's dive deep into the data when it comes to the Federal Reserve and policies. As always, my name is Derek. I got my degree in finance. You don't have to. Let's dive right in. So this entire problem really came to the forefront of, I think, everybody's minds literally because of the last job report. And what makes this last jobs report so interesting and concerning is that it took place just a few days after the Federal Reserve met, which means that the Federal Reserve made their decision to not change interest rates. And then just a couple of days later, you had a major report that basically it made it seem like they made the wrong call. So the Federal Reserve chose not to cut interest rates. The main reason they've done this is twofold. First is because of the threat of tariff inflation. Okay, tariffs are coming, and the inflation that is going to follow, it is, if you ask pretty much any economist, any finance professional, myself included, tariff inflation will happen. It's not a matter of if, it is a matter of when we run out of inventory, and it's a matter of how much. Is it going to be negligible, or is it going to be something significant? That's the first question. So the Federal Reserve chooses not to cut interest rates because of that, but also because they thought they had a buffer in the jobs market. Okay, the Federal Reserve has a dual mandate. They have two main goals, right? And that is maximum employment and price stability, preferably at 2% inflation. That's what they want. If they can maximize employment and they can have 2% inflation, they will be happy. Okay, well, what's been going on? Well, you have inflation that has not reached the 2% target yet, plus you have tariff inflation looming on the horizon. So they decide to keep interest rates stable because the job market looked strong. Okay, just a couple of days later, the fresh new jobs report came out, and it was an absolute disaster. I made a video on that. Many other people have made videos on that. Basically, you had an estimate that over 100,000 jobs would be created, but only 73,000 jobs were created. Remember, we need over 100,000 jobs just to keep up with population growth. Now, what is more concerning is the fact that the previous 2 months were revised down massively. Okay, so for May and June, instead of having over 250, close to 300,000 jobs added, you had less than 30,000 jobs added. So May was revised from 144,000 down to 19,000, and June was revised from 147,000 down to 14,000 jobs created. Okay, and then you have the most recent jobs report at 73,000, which in the coming months may likely be revised down to a few thousand jobs, if not negative. Okay, so that combination is scary, and now we can talk about the title of this video or the thumbnail of this video, and that is stagflation. Why does this mean there's a chance of stagflation? Well, because stagflation is what? Stagflation is increasing inflation, thus half of the word, plus stagnation in the economy, which means low economic growth. You can measure this as GDP or employment, plus high unemployment or increasing unemployment. Remember, the Federal Reserve, the main tool they have is controlling the money supply or interest rates, the FFR. Now, in recent history, starting in 2008, they have done this through quantitative easing as well. But all this is trying to do the same thing, and that is control how easy or hard people have access to funds are. Now, the problem is they have this dual mandate, right? So you can think of this as either sides of a scale. And when they change interest rates or try to control the money supply, you have a positive impact on one thing, but a negative impact on the other. So if you make it easier for people to get access to money, you have job growth, but you have inflation risk because easier money, prices increase. Whereas at the same time, if you restrict money supply, you have a positive effect on inflation. Basically, inflation comes down, but because it's harder to get access to money, companies don't hire as easily and jobs don't increase. So what makes stagflation so dangerous, so scary to an economist or to a finance professional is that you are basically having both problems at the same time, and you only have one tool if you're the Federal Reserve to try and control that. And right now, because you have tariff inflation looming, you have inflation at not nearly close to 2% on the core metrics. So the Federal Reserve is left in this weird position. Do they lower interest rates to help the job market that is clearly getting worse, but that might cause inflation to increase, especially when tariff inflation hits? Or do you keep interest rates higher for longer to fight that inflation, but you're going to have basically an exponentially worse effect on the job market? So they have one tool to fix two problems, and that vitamin or pill or medicine has opposite effects on both. Now, what makes this scary is usually when you have inflation, that means the economy is strong. So you have job growth, right? So you can increase interest rates, restrict the money supply to bring inflation down, and you have a buffer when it comes to job growth, because usually inflation means the economy is strong. On the flip side, if you have like periods of recession, that means you have bad job growth, right? Or unemployment rate is high, but a lot of times inflation isn't high because companies can't charge high prices because nobody can afford them. But right now you have cost push inflation, which is coming from tariffs, which means companies have to increase prices just to maintain profits, not to increase them, just to maintain profits. So you have a mandatory increase in prices, while at the very same time, you have employment that is worsening. That is why stagflation is looming. And in my opinion, while stagflation is very, very rare, and I still think the Federal Reserve will figure out a way to get around this, it is at an increased risk right now, probably higher than it's been in some time. We did have a scare a few years ago, but right now I would say that remember, the scare before was because interest rates had increased, people thought the job market was going to plummet, and then you'd have 9% inflation and a bad job market. That didn't happen. So I think right now would be the highest risk since then, probably since COVID. Now, to wrap up this video, I think that while stagflation is a very serious problem, I do think that we're going to figure out a way to get around this. I think the Federal Reserve has done a decent job, although it usually comes at the expense of printing a ton of money, at avoiding major economic problems. And before I wrap this up, I also want to touch on one other thing. People might also be saying, well, can't companies, why does it matter? Companies can just, not raise prices. They'll take the inflation hit, they won't raise prices. Who cares if their profits suffer? And on the surface, I would agree with that. The problem is because of how this whole economic system is set up, companies must continue to increase their profits. If not, their stocks suffer, their investments suffer. And yes, of course, that affects the CEOs and their bonus packages. That affects major shareholders, but it also affects everyday Americans, because everyday Americans, the only reason anyone can retire is because they have those retirement accounts tied into exchange-traded funds, which are then tied into companies. So if companies cannot increase profits, that's a bad day for everyone's retirement account. So yes, it affects the 1%, the very wealthy, the 0.01%, but it also affects everyday Americans. So it's not as easy as just say, screw them, who cares about these companies, just eat the cost. Because unfortunately, that means that average everyday Americans, especially those approaching retirement, might not be able to retire. And that is even worse for everyone because one, you should be able to retire at some point in your life, but two, now you have more people fighting for the same amount of jobs. So you have the youth coming in, and then you're pushing retirement further and further away. So you have population growth and people retiring at a later age. That also raises the unemployment rate. So all this is tied together, even things that don't feel like they're tied together. It is all working together, and that's why it's like a web. And when or like a guitar or something, when you pull on one string, you affect stuff elsewhere. So, without risking making this video way too long, I do think that we are at an increased risk of stagflation right now. And we'll have to see over the next year how that changes. It might, the stagflation risk might increase. Hopefully it decreases, or it might show up. This all has to do with tariffs, how much the inflation effect of tariffs are. It also has to do with how well the Federal Reserve manages their monetary policy. If they start cutting, I've been calling for an interest rate cut for a few months. I don't want to drag this video out too long, but I have said I've been supportive of Jerome Powell and the Federal Reserve up until recently. But the last few months, it's looking like it was time to cut interest rates, and I don't mean to pat myself on the back, but looking at it now, yeah, we could have cut interest rates a couple meetings ago. The next meeting is in September. It's pretty much guaranteed that they cut interest rates at that meeting, and then probably at another meeting before the end of the year. So either October or December, one of those meetings. But I hope this video was informative. If it was, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel out tremendously. It's tough to grow here on YouTube, but I love the stuff. I love finance. I understand finance pretty well, and I love being able to share that with you guys as well as economics. It's been my passion for close to a decade. So please consider subscribing if you haven't already, and I hope to see you in the next video. Until then, I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, and I will see you in the next one. Take care.